Okay, today we are talking about rhetorical strategies that you're going to use in your presidential campaign speeches, which is a minor paper right now in quarter two. So, as you know from the rhetorical strategy or from the presidential speech information, there's a number of strategies that you need to include and some strategies that you have to choose between. So, I'm going to go over all of those for you, and we are going to discuss each of them and go through what they mean. So first, the type of strategy that we're looking at right here, these are repetitive uses of words or phrases throughout a document. So they could be words or phrases, and you could repeat at the beginning of successive phrases, sentences, or paragraphs. So anaphora is repetition that occurs at the beginning. This part right here, beginning, represents anaphora. Repetition at the end of one sentence or phrase or paragraph and the beginning of the next is called anadiplosis, and repetition at the end of sentence, phrase, or paragraph is called antistrophe. Anaphora, anadiplosis, antistrophe. Beginning, end, end. So the first two examples here, let us be the generation who from Obama's 2008 acceptance speech for the Democratic nomination, is an example of anaphora. President Barack Obama loves to use anaphora in his speeches, a lot of repetition at the beginning. So he goes into a single paragraph in his speech where he says, let us be the generation who, let us be the generation who, in 3 or 4 sentences in a row. And then he goes into 3 or 4 paragraphs where the beginning of each paragraph is, let us be the generation who. There's your anaphora, and it kind of underlines this call to action that he wants for people who are voting for him. Another example, but a smaller scale, is this little phrase, be bold, be brief, be gone. Repetition of the word be here. That's an example of anaphora. Next, we've got 2 examples of anadiplosis. So you can see a slave and the slave, end of one sentence, beginning of the next. A gladiator and the gladiator, end of one sentence, beginning of the next. That's anadiplosis. So that's 3 sentences where you can see it occurring in. And here is one sentence where we have our leader is dead, dead before his prime. We've got that repetition of the word dead at the end of one phrase and the beginning of the next. And then finally, antistrophe, repetition at the end of successive sentences. Here we have selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking others to live as one wishes to live. The repetition of as one wishes to live at the end of those 2 sentences is antistrophe. And then here it is in a single sentence. We rise to show our support. We wave flags to show our support. We join together to show our support for our land. To show our support, to show our support, to show our support. At the end of those 3 different phrases. Anaphora, anadiplosis, and antistrophe create an appeal to pathos. They typically make people feel inspired or energized in order to do something. That is kind of the purpose of them. So you want to think about what do I want to encourage people to do? What kind of call to action am I making? And maybe think about that with your anaphora, anadiplosis, or antistrophe. You have to choose between anaphora and antistrophe, although you can do both, but you have to do anadiplosis somewhere in your essay. So choose between these 2, have to do that one. Good rule of thumb, by the way, is the rule of thirds. If you repeat something 3 times, beginning or end, that makes it feel deliberate, like a pattern. Whereas if you do it less than that, sometimes it doesn't feel deliberate. If you do it more than that, sometimes it feels a little too repetitive. So think about 3 times. All right, the next device that you're choosing from, you have to choose alliteration or assonance or consonants. You can do more than one if you want, but you're only required to do one. So this is repetition of sound. So alliteration repeats starting sounds. Let us lead our land. Be bold, be brief, be gone. Another example, alliteration and assonance. And anaphora. Assonance is repeating of vowel sounds in 2 or more words, and a lot of times that's internal. So He fell asleep under the cherry tree. Remember that sound, not just repetition of letter. So, for example, the word cherry doesn't fit in that pattern because the E in cherry doesn't make the long E sound, as in he fell asleep under the tree. Cherry, it's a different sound. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, one of my favorite examples of assonance. Okay, and then last, consonants is a repetition of consonants, can occur anywhere within a sentence. So share the sad word of defeat with our good Lord. These words and that repetition of that sound "d" in there, that kind of creates that consonants. But notice it's not really a pattern. She struck a streak of bad luck. You'll see that a lot of my examples have that consonant sound coming at the end of words, but it could be anywhere. Okay, choose between alliteration, assonance, and consonants. Appear somewhere in your essay and make sure you label it. Next, I'm asking you to do variation of syntax. And this is one of my favorite examples from Gary Provost of how a variation of syntax changes the feeling of what you are writing. So what you want to think of is short sentences that I can include within my essay that kind of make a point. So if you look at this first paragraph he writes, this sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. It's really dull to hear it like that. But he shows you very, very short sentences in yellow, short sentences in pink, medium sentences in green, and long sentences in blue. And when you pull that together, this is what it sounds like. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes, when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. So write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words. Write music. So when you read that and you get to that, now listen, music, write music, or the writing sings, or don't just write words, those short sentences really create an impact, especially when occurring after longer sentences. So that's what I want you to think about as you're writing this essay and when you're writing all of your essays, to think about the music that the words create within the essay. All right, next one, asyndeton and polysyndeton. You have to do one of those. Asyndeton is simply a list with no conjunctions. So one thing that you need to note is that if you include one conjunction at all, that it's not asyndeton. So what you do with that, for example, if I use the sentence, let us fight for peace, justice, freedom, liberty. Notice I didn't say, let's fight for peace, justice, freedom, and liberty. That is no longer asyndeton. That just becomes a list, right? The use of just those commas between those words is supposed to speed up the rhythm of the passage if you want something to go quickly. Let us fight for peace, freedom, justice, liberty. Let us go on out into the countryside and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you get that, how that like speeds us up. Polysyndeton, on the other hand, is putting a conjunction between everything in the list. Let us fight for peace and justice and freedom and liberty. And that slows the rhythm of the passage down when we put in those ands in between. No commas, just conjunctions, and. Okay, so that both allow equal importance. If we say, let us fight for peace, justice, freedom, and liberty, liberty kind of gets more importance in that list than the other things that come before it, because we have that pause in the rhythm right before it. Okay. Asyndeton or polysyndeton, your choice. Okay, 2 things that you have to include, both of them, diacope and comoratio. That word is pronounced diacope, not diacope, diacope, and comoratio. So diacope is repetition of words or phrases but without a pattern. So repetition, no pattern. So, for example, he is a good man, a good, kind man who listens and recognizes the good in others. We've got good, good, and good at different points in the sentence. It's not beginning every phrase, it's not ending any phrase, but it's repeating. We also have man that's repeated twice in the sentence, both examples of diacope. The second example, I hate to be poor, and we are poor, offensively poor, but you tell us that when we are poor, we will inherit the earth. The use of the word poor there, it starts out, it looks like antistrophe. It had to be poor, we are poor, offensively poor. But then we throw in that last poor, which creates diacope, repetition without pattern. Repetition of ideas is commeratio. So using different words to say the same idea. The first example here about the parrot is basically three different sentences saying the parrot is dead. The second example is basically three different sentences saying that it's damp outside, right? But you do it in all like three different ways. Remember, 3 is a good number for repetition. So that's diacope and commeratio. And then last, standard figures of speech. I've given you 5 standard figures of speech: hyperbole, metaphor, simile, personification, and oxymoron. For the essay, I want you to include 4 of those somewhere and label them. So hyperbole, that extreme exaggeration. Got 2 examples for you. The first one is one said by President Trump. If Obama is the king of anaphora, President Trump is the king of hyperbole. So he really, I will be the greatest jobs president God ever created. Like, really, that's an extreme exaggeration, as is saying no woman in history is better suited to meet our needs. You can't ever say that. No woman in history, really. Metaphor and simile. Metaphor, remember, is a comparison between 2 things, not using like or as. I am a shining star of progress. Simile, using like or as. And then personification, giving human characteristics to something that is not human. And oxymoron, including a phrase where you have 2 opposites next to each other, like just act naturally. Can't act naturally. It's not possible. Alone together, which is like, isn't that the phrase of the coronavirus pandemic? We are alone together. It can't actually be alone together, right? And then clearly confused. So those are the language requirements that you have for this paper. Remember that you have to make choices between some, or you can just do all of them if you want, but you want to make sure you label them clearly within your presidential campaign speech. Hopefully that gave you a good understanding of what to do. Let me know if you have any questions by sending me an email or a remind, and I will see you in class very soon.